Nutrimedical Report, and we have some amazing revelations happening, actually some battles being won, and new battles being formed, but it looks like our side is organizing, and it's interesting, bipartisan Democratic and Republican moves. So, Harley, tell us about this major movement with, of course, one of the leaders being Rand Paul. Tell us what's happening. And, of course, we have people in both the Democratic and Republican Party moving on this issue.
Well, I think to start with, we should just assert that the Obama administration is on its way out. The only thing keeping it in there is the gutlessness of the leadership of both parties. But there was a new flank opened yesterday on an issue that LaRouche has been very much at the center of, along with former Florida Senator Bob Graham, a Democrat who retired about 6 years ago. What happened yesterday, well, to summarize it quickly, the 28 pages is a reference to the joint House and Senate report on 9/11, which came out, I think, in 2003, which identified what the operation was on 9/11, including 28-page chapter on the Saudi role, the role of Saudi Arabia in funding it, in logistical coordination, and so on. These 28 pages were classified by President Bush, who said it would do damage to national security. Now, the only damage it would do is to Bush and Cheney, showing that they were in league with the Saudis, who are the leading funders of terrorism in the world. Right. Now, at the end of Bush's term, Obama promised as a candidate he would declassify the pages. And then, as president, he met with the family members of the victims of 9/11 and pledged to them he would declassify it. 6.5 years into his administration, he's refused to declassify it. Now, a bill was introduced in the House by Republican Congressman Walter Jones and Republican Congressman Thomas Massey, and a Democratic co-sponsor, Stephen Lynch of Massachusetts. And they held a press conference yesterday with Bob Graham, but added to it now was Senator Rand Paul. And Senator Paul announced that he has two leading Democratic senators who are going to join him in the Senate bill. And these are Kirsten Gillibrand of New York and Ron Wyden of Oregon. Now, in the presentation, Graham at a certain point did a very dramatic thing. He showed the 28 pages, but it was just blank pages on paper. And he said, it's not little redaction. The whole thing has been wiped out, has been refused to be allowed to be seen in public. And if he were to say what's in it, he could go to jail under various classification procedures. Now, here's what Rand Paul did last night. On top of this, he's going to introduce this as an amendment to the National Defense Authorization Act, which comes up next week, which means there'll be debate on it. And this has created incredible excitement among people who are serious about getting at the bottom of who runs international terror. And it's terrorizing the Bush networks, including Mitch McConnell, and the Obama supporters because of their cover-up on this.
Right.
So this will come to a head this next week. And this is extremely important because they're going to have a hard time keeping it out of the media. The Washington Post and the New York Times, of course, didn't cover the press conference, but it's covered everywhere else. It's heavily in the British press, the Russian press, McClatchy, Bloomberg. They all had releases on it. And people can see it in full, the 40-minute press conference on LaRouchePAC.com. Now, the one most important point that Graham also made is he said some people are saying it will undermine national security to release this report. He said it's the contrary. Not releasing it has undermined our security because it's prevented intelligence agencies from tracing the networks from 9/11 to the Saudis and the same networks operating today against American interests in the Middle East and ISIS and Al-Qaeda with the same Saudi funding with support from Obama. So how can you protect your nation against an enemy when you don't allow the enemy to be exposed?
Right.
And that's the fraud of the administration's arguments on the Patriot Act and NSA spying and so on.
This will affect a number of zones. It'll affect the prosecution of America being on both sides of ISIS or ISIL. It'll affect the presidential candidate list, including Jeb Bush, who will be blown out of the water. It'll affect the fact we may move from a selection to an actual election where we have good Democrat and Republican candidates, so Hillary Clinton will get washed away in this mess as well. So it has a lot of positive effects if it's properly implemented.
Well, now also, Business Insider, which is a Wall Street publication, had an article today saying Martin O'Malley has emerged as Wall Street's enemy number one for his comments when he announced his candidacy last Saturday. And what he said was that the rich have gotten richer. They've continued to violate the rules and the intent of the Constitution with bailouts, with fraud, with not being prosecuted. He said it's amazing. In Maryland, if you drive with a burned-out taillight, you can get picked up. But if you steal billions on Wall Street, you have a get-out-of-jail-free card.
Right.
Now, then O'Malley went on to say that these bullies of Wall Street think they can control the election. And you'll like this quote, Dr. Bill, because it's what you've been saying. He said, Lloyd Blankfein of Goldman Sachs said it doesn't matter to him whether it's Hillary or Jeb. And he said, well, I bet it doesn't matter to him, is what O'Malley said. Then he went on to say, but to the American people, we have a message for these Wall Street bullies. The presidency is not a crown that can be passed back and forth between two families to defend the interests of the powerful. The presidency is a sacred trust with the American people, and we have to make sure that that's what this next election is about. And I think that's a very powerful message and needs to be heard by everyone.
Yeah, in fact, this is really the last chance to resurrect America. We're being, our jobs in the last 20 years have been deported into other countries without proper environmental or worker standards in China, Indonesia, and elsewhere. We've had a situation where they've driven the country into debt. We used to be the largest creditor nation on the planet. Now it's the largest debtor. Our foreign policies are fractured and schizophrenic. Everywhere we're not collaborating with, for example, Russia to get rid of the drug trade in Afghanistan, we've actually amplified their problem and our problem. It's all under weak presidents, which are both parties, George Bush and Obama, both. Double terms, doubling the power and the control of just a smaller and smaller clique of banks and international financiers that are shoving us toward world war is their final solution, because they don't care as long as they're in control, even if most of the world is dead. Right?
I lost you there for a minute.
I said even if most of the world is dead, they're going to continue to push their agenda.
Well, even if they kill the world, they're going to continue to push their agenda.
Oh, yeah, they're crazy. They're completely crazy and evil.
And the important thing is that we're now seeing an emergence of leadership. And the biggest problem is that it's still on issues, not on principle. And while I'm very pleased that Rand Paul did this on the 28 pages and that O'Malley has come out for support of Glass-Steagall, they've got to have the guts to say Obama has to go and we're going to return this country to its constitutional practices.
Exactly. Pretty amazing, isn't it?
And that's not an issue. That's a matter of principle. And the American people will rally behind leaders who are committed to those principles.
Yeah. Amazing. So it's amazing to me that that this situation has we're finally getting a response by a few good politicians, and it also could truncate the whole political process, because in the Republican Party there's so much internal pandering and infighting, and then of course the Democratic Party, they're committing the Japanese term is harikari. They're committing Democratic Party suicide by continuing to back Hillary Clinton, that's determined that she's going to continue shoving forward her agenda, not answering any questions, and she's going to kill their party. Back in a minute, maybe this will mean we'll have an actual election, not a selection. Articles here to talk about, and just run through some of the headings again. Obama is going out, but he's not going out fast enough. June 2nd, Capitol Hill press conference. Senate introduces companion resolution on 28 pages. We talked about that in the first segment. Next, war danger becoming more obvious, obviously. Obama must be removed. If we don't, in fact, the next step I expect is the closure of the strait and all the Iranians have to do if the Houthi rebel attack, including with the use of neutron weapons, which we have very good evidence in foreign press and research by classified sources, that the Saudi Arabians, with our assistance, dropped a neutron bomb on the Yemenis and was actually in collaboration with the Israelis because they're the ones in charge and control of micronukes. And then we have the first test of the new presidency, get Obama out now. If we don't get him out, we're probably going to have a major war in the Middle East. We're probably going to have an economic crash by this fall, and we're probably going to have social chaos in this country like we've never seen before. And Obama is racing the nation toward catastrophe, isn't he?
Well, I think the important thing on Obama is that if we had committed legitimate leadership on the Republican side, he would have had a bill of impeachment as early as 3 years ago.
Exactly.
Now, the argument that, well, it won't work or the Democrats will block it, all you have to do to overcome that argument is make the case and prove it, which could be done. Now, if you make the case and prove it, and people still are afraid to vote for impeachment, you'll put a lot of salt on his tail. And if we don't do that, he is now, look, there are 5 or 6 military exercises going on now in Finland, in Latvia, in Lithuania, in Poland, in the Black Sea, where U.S. forces and NATO forces are practicing war with Russia. Now, the Russians, meanwhile, are sitting on their side of the border doing their own exercises, but they're not in other countries. Our forces are in these other countries on the border of Russia practicing for war. And this is where the provocation would come from. And, Dr. Bill, there was a NATO general. 2 things of importance. One is the current military commander of NATO is a Czech general. And he said that in order to stop a Russian invasion, we need to be prepared for tactical nuclear strikes into Russia. Now, this is not some commentator or some nutcase. It's the commander of military of NATO. Secondly, a NATO general told a reporter, this was reported in the London Times, we're probably going to be at war with Russia by the end of the summer. I hope it's not nuclear. Now, this kind of discussion process is provocation in itself.
Well, first off, hoping it's not nuclear, people have to understand the Russians' policy in international war. They have a massive first-strike weapon system, and they don't really have a giant, what we call projectable navy or military force. So basically, their idea not compared to us. And so what happens is the Russians basically have to clobber us into submission and then ask us on the phone to have a peace treaty. And they have the capacity to completely wipe us out many times over. And the fact is that the Russians may not necessarily have a policy of standing back and waiting until they see what we're going to do, because there's no country on earth that can project force over a long period of time over multiple battlefields than America. So that we can have a prolonged war, even if it's a war of attrition, but the Russians can't. Now, they have 5 times the size of our special forces, but they have very small regular military or militia. So as a result, basically, they have to clobber the heck out of us with nuclear weapons, which they're very capable of doing, and weather weapons, which they have. By the way, they're number 2 in the world in terms of geoengineering weather. So they don't even have to hit us with a nuclear weapon. They can just cause superstorms to clobber the heck out of our country. And they just make a phone call to the president and say, hey, do you want this to stop or do you want the day after tomorrow?
And the important thing is that when you start gaming for nuclear war, you're basically sending the message to the local and field-directed officers that this is something that is now on the agenda. And so your danger of having something from a forward position launch a provocation leading to nuclear war is much greater. And so when you have a situation where the Russians see us on their border, and by the way, did you see this new material coming from Russia on the MH17, where they now say they have confirmed evidence that a U.S. satellite was in the area when the plane was shot down, so there must be U.S. satellite photos. And secondly, the Russian company that manufactures the Buk anti-aircraft missile said that the missile that hit that plane was an old model that the Ukrainians have, but not that the Russians have. And they said they're willing to bring a team of experts there and fire off their new missile to show that it would not have created the damage to the plane that was the damage that was actually created. And so they asked Maria Harf at the State Department yesterday, have you looked at this new evidence? And she said, we continue to stand by our view that it was the Russian forces that shot down the MH17.
Maria Harf has a mental problem. This woman actually, I think she needs to be in a locked psychiatric unit. She should not be in the State Department. She's out of her mind.
You know, there's a new word that's been coined called harfing, which is the ability to say something absurd and preposterous and seem as though you're serious.
And actually seem aggressive over it.
Yeah.
Aggressively vicious over the fact of making a stupid statement that is obscene in its extreme.
But, both of the last two presidents have had press secretaries who have had to do this. Their job is to lie, to defend the lies coming out of the White House.
But actually have almost a straight face over it, too.
Well, and seem indignant when someone challenges them.
Well, in fact, actually, not only act indignant, but act almost like, hey, we're almost to the point where opposing me verbally is enough to be jailed and or executed.
Well, are you on the other side? That's, they're saying these are the lines of the Putin apologists. So if you're telling the truth about what's happening in Ukraine, you're labeled a Putin apologist. So, we've reached a low level in terms of discussion. But here's I think what people have to focus on, and we should really talk about this in the second half of the program. The rest of the world has pretty much given up on the United States. They're watching us collapse. Look, we had a -7. They readjusted the GDP figures for the first quarter from plus 0.1% to -0.7%. The second quarter is looking like it's heading below zero again, which is the technical definition of a recession.
Well, there's a thing called
they reported 200,000 new jobs. Only 7,000 are full-time jobs in manufacturing. Most of the rest are part-time, temporary, or low-wage.
Yeah, well, there's a thing called the velocity of the economy. It's just like an aircraft. If it doesn't have enough forward velocity, it can't lift. If it doesn't have lift, it does a thing called crash. And when you don't have enough lift, the economy is going to crash. Right?
That's where we are.
Not good. Yeah, we're there. As I say, it doesn't hurt until the ground comes up. A-page document. What we've been talking about on the break is the fact that this proves that America has been involved in sponsoring terrorism. We have on the ground, for example, they had last week a U.S. general retired, who was actually as a Fox News contributing analyst, on the ground with ISIS, retrieved by special forces, and they had to kill off a bunch of ISIS to get him out of there. And which would have been super embarrassing because he was actually on the ground giving advice to the ISIS people on how to operationally continue to take over more territory and slaughter Christians and other Muslims. And we are dropping equipment where we know the territorial areas that ISIS has to their areas, the same way we know, for example, the 9/11 and even the so-called Saudi terrorists that were there. These were actors that were there, and I'm sure they were just as shocked when they died or were dumped on the ocean, because we know that, for example, from very good sources, I have classified sources, that the aircraft that struck the buildings were not American Airlines jets. They were E-10s, and I even know where they were refurbished in Fort Collins, Colorado, and have talked to even the technicians that were involved with refurbishing before the war game called 9/11. 9/11 was a war game. It was a simulation, and it went live, and Dick Cheney down there with Senator Normanetta, at the bunker, was constantly asking, what are you going to do to stop this so-called jet from coming into the Pentagon? What struck the Pentagon was not an airliner jet. It was a missile. We have all the evidence to prove that. The entire thing was a flamtastic, crazy scheme by the globalists to steal the Iraqi oil, to rearrange the deck chairs of the Middle East, and to create the dialectic of more and more chaos that could take more of our rights away. And if people think this is all made up, let me tell you, I worked on the inside in Operation Top Off in Dark Winter, and I'm so angry about this. I can't even contain you. The word rage is not strong enough for what I see coming.
Well, let's go back to the 28 pages, because this is a tool we can use now to break the direction of U.S. policy. Under Bush and Obama, the United States has been promoting a war plan called the Bernard Lewis Plan, aimed at permanent warfare in the Middle East, which has implications both for oil control, but also for strategic choke points, as you point out, the Straits of Hormuz, but also threats against Russia, India, and China. And their greatest fear right now is that the BRICS alliance is moving ahead. The BRICS countries are now funding development, and they're getting more and more countries that want to join with them and leave behind the collapsing Western financial system.
Right.
Now, if they can blow this thing up using terrorists that are known entities going back to the 1980s in Afghanistan, I mean, the bin Laden network, the so-called jihadists back then, Al-Qaeda and Taliban were trained in U.S. training camps on the Pakistani border in the 1980s to be deployed into Afghanistan.
Right.
So the Defense Intelligence Agency just released these reports, which, under the Judicial Watch filing, the DIA did not have to release this. They could have claimed it as privileged information, but they released it, which means some people wanted this to get out. And what it shows is that Obama, Susan Rice, and Hillary Clinton lied about what happened in Benghazi on September 11th, 2012. Secondly, that the U.S. knew that from that Benghazi terminal, arms that we had given Al-Qaeda-linked networks in Libya were being transshipped to the Al-Qaeda-linked networks in Syria. So as you were just saying, we're dropping arms into areas controlled by ISIS. This has been going on for 3 years now, at least, where we've been arming the very terrorists that we claim we're fighting. Right. Now, the important thing about the 28 pages is that it will show, I'm reasonably convinced from people who have read it from the Senate and House and have talked about it a little bit, it will reasonably show that there was a Saudi component in creating the false flag operation that was known as 9/11, that was designed to suck the United States into permanent war in the Middle East, and that Saudi connection was covered up by Bush, has now been covered up by Obama, and that this is being covered up not to protect Bush from 2002, 2003, but to protect the ongoing operations today. Now, if we get these hearings on this and get the story out in the open, Obama is finished, because he's been allowing this cover-up to occur so he can continue supporting Saudi genocide against Muslims, against Christians, against Alawites, Shia, and so on. So this is really important, because, as you know, and the more intelligent of your listeners know this, the way you stop a terrorist army is you cut off its supplies, you cut off its money, you cut off its recruitment potential, and you do that by exposing who they are and why they're doing it. This is not about an Islamic State. It's a money-making operation that's using social media to recruit idiots who are disillusioned and hopeless and angry to go out and destroy human beings. Yeah. And we could stop it. We could shut it down. We could work with the Russians, with the Iranians, with the sane people in Israel, and that means not Netanyahu's people, with Assad in Syria, with the general in Libya who's based in Tobruk and who's fighting the Tripoli regime, with the al-Sisi government in Egypt. There are plenty of people that want to fight this terrorism. But instead, we're arming it and prolonging it as a tool not for the Middle East, but against the people in the United States. We're the ultimate target of this.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. In other words, these things are just tools to get at and control the U.S. population and steer the world economy toward a unitary system where the BRICS nations become vassals. And
it's a total bankrupt financial system that's trying to sustain its rule by crushing the alternative and convincing us that we have no choice but to accept the crumbs that fall off the imperial table.
Exactly.
And that's why when Martin O'Malley announced his campaign with an attack on the bullies of Wall Street, and when Rand Paul stood up to shut down the Patriot Act, even though they passed something almost as bad with the USA Freedom Act. And then when Rand Paul went across the aisle with Gillibrand and Wyden and said, let's open these 28 pages, this is a threat to the control of the political system by Wall Street and Wall Street-related geopolitical networks. It's a very severe threat to them, and they're panicked over it. The line on O'Malley is, oh, don't worry about him. Hillary's got it locked up, and he represents nothing. No one's supporting him. But they're spending a lot of time talking about how insignificant he is. Similarly with Rand Paul, if you look at most of the Republicans, you look at Lindsey Graham, who's announced, you look at people like Scott Walker, who wouldn't know a foreign policy if it hit him in the head, but more importantly, Jeb Bush, Rick Perry, other people going in, they're all for the police state, they're all for the global bankers dictatorship, and they're all for the wars. And Rand Paul is saying he's not for the wars, and he's not for the lies and the cover-up. So this is an opportunity for the American people to overturn the whole chessboard. And that's why it's so important.
Yeah. Well, what I see happening is very, very significant. The situation now, though, I think it brings up another area of danger. When this group of maniacs gets cornered like a cornered rat, there's an old story in Germany called the devil rat. And they would be devil rats that they would tell stories to the children about in the mines or deep places in the earth. And if you corner the devil rat with its red eyes, it's going to try to eat you. And I assume right now that if these people are cornered, the next thing that I'm worried about is something far worse than 9/11. Either the
look at the story that just came out the other day, Bill, where the TSA is reporting that 95% of the test cases of smuggling of weapons on the planes are going through. That's a perfect cover for a false flag.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, how could that be, Just a 98% of test weapons going through? How crazy. I mean, even if you had plastic weapons, where only a tiny part of the actual mechanism of the gun, for example, that would require a lot of technology to be able to get a quote of plastic or some other weapons through the system. It's medical report. Harley, I think I have a great sense of hope, and both of us, we're optimists, aren't we? We wouldn't be doing this if we weren't optimists. We realize if we mobilize even a minority of the population, people are just going to take it back. And this includes, by the way, rich and powerful people, because they're in the same boat. In fact, if anything, they have a clear understanding of the maniacs that are their confreres that are out of their cotton-picking minds. I mean, anybody rich and powerful with a few $1 billion or $100 billion in the bank doesn't want to see this go down the toilet.
But real human beings are optimistic by nature. Because a real human starts their thinking with a love of mankind and recognizing that the fact that there are a lot of sins doesn't mean you condemn the sinners. It means you change them. You offer them a chance to be better. You have a situation where we have been miseducated. We have been subjected to imperial war propaganda. And also we've been made to break our allegiance to this idea of a human race and instead choose smaller and smaller identity groups, whether it's sexual identity, which, with this latest, you talk about diversions, the fact of the matter is that here's Rand Paul holding this press conference yesterday, and what's the lead story? Caitlyn Jenner. As though this is a world-shaking issue that Americans have to pay attention to. So, here we are in a situation where there is great hope because the atrocities that have been committed in the name of the global banker alliance are now becoming more and more clear to the average person. And so it's an open field for us to go out and organize. And I'm always reminded of someone who was complaining to Mr. LaRouche one time and said, yeah, but I'm talking to people and they don't understand what I'm saying and they don't seem to like what I'm saying. And LaRouche said, well, have you ever thought about what a Christian missionary in Africa faced? Do you think people understood the mission of Jesus Christ? Do you think they understood what the missionaries were talking about? You go in with a mission to bring ideas to people who have been deprived of those ideas. And you have to do it with love and optimism. If you do it out of hate, I'm going to show you how bad this guy is, you're never going to make any progress.
Right. Yeah, you got to do it with a positive attitude.
So you tell the truth about someone like Obama, but you present an alternative which shows you what could be done if we didn't have him as an impediment to solving the problems.
Well, I'll give you an example. For example, let's say here's the solution to the Muslim problem worldwide. Number one, we would tell Muslim imams we're going to put an officer in every imam in every mosque in America to make sure that we are not giving a message that suggests you're going to violate the Constitution or ever get Sharia law. Number one, we'd make that very plain. Number two, we'd say if you come out and verbally support a mission against extreme Islam, we'll support and let you stay in this country. Otherwise, we're going to deport you. That'd be number two. And number three, we would tell the more foreign countries, we're going to send in special forces, we're going to kill the extreme Muslims, and we're going to make sure your country can have stability, and you're not going to be under the boot like Egypt, which was told years ago that they have to, by the European bankers, export material and specific kinds of food and so on to Europe. They couldn't have an economy where they could grow their own wheat or do other things. So now they're basically...
Did you see what Human Rights Watch just did for Egypt? They put out a report where they said Egypt is an out-of-control human rights violator. There have been 2,600 people killed in the last year in political violence. And then buried in the report
civil war
is that 700 of those people killed were policemen. And a friend of mine from the Egyptian government was saying, we're at war against terrorists. What are we supposed to do, lay down our arms?
Well, 50% of the population are very Western. I know I have Western friends from Egypt. And 50% want to go back to the 8th century extreme Islam maniacs. And they're going to have a civil war. The Muslim Brotherhood was literally turned back by the military generals who were highly educated, own most of the industries in Egypt, and are completely freaked out by this internal battle. There also is a giant dam being built in Ethiopia, which has violated 4,000 plus years of history, that puts it in extreme danger of a dam failure that drives water all the way up to Khartoum and destroys much of the southern Egypt right to the High Aswan Dam. And if it's full, that'll break, and the water will be carried all the way to the delta. The fact is, Egypt is just waiting for a catastrophe to happen. And I believe that civil war is going to happen real soon. The current general there actually is very reasonable in terms of dealing with Israel and America.
Well, he's more than reasonable. He actually has a development program. He's putting young Egyptians to work. He understands that for Egypt to develop, it needs to take its educated young people and give them something to do to build the nation, as opposed to
so they won't want to join an extreme Islam group
and ending up getting recruited into Islamic terrorists. So I'm very optimistic about what's happening in Egypt. But what I'm pointing out is that our State Department keeps threatening the al-Sisi government that if they keep cracking down on Islamic extremists, they're going to get their weapons that we're supposed to provide them taken away. Well, that's
Can you believe that? Can you believe how nervy they are?
Terrorists.
In fact, they've actually said that if you don't treat the Muslim Brotherhood with the kind of respect that we want you to treat them with, even though these guys are terrorists, we're going to withdraw weapon systems and contracts. They even build M1 Abrams tanks, an older version, on contract with us, and one of the best armored personnel carriers, like the Bearcat, in the world, built in Egypt under license from us, and yet we're going to treat them with disrespect so that they can't have... And the real population of Egypt, they don't really realize this, but it's well over 110 million people. And that giant population there, they should be the first power there. In fact, they're the best ally of any so-called Muslim nation that is both Christian, Maronite, etc., that can live together in the area. In fact, they're the best so-called ally that Egypt
make up about 8% of the Egyptian population.
Right, but that's the salt of the entire geopolitical system there. And the Coptic Christian leaders came along with the military generals and the moderate Muslim leaders, and they all came together and said, "Hey, we got to get rid of this Muslim Brotherhood. They're going to wreck things."
And that's why they were able to not just have a coup, but then immediately move into a policy of economic development. And the Egyptians are getting support from China and Russia. Right. And as is Greece now, is on the verge, this Friday we'll find out if Greece makes it through the first tranche of the IMF debt payments in June.
Not going to happen.
3 more coming up.
It's not going to happen. I guarantee you. Well, this summer, Greece is going. And what China's doing...
The first first one is only $300 million this Friday, and I think Greece will probably pay it. But they're not going to pay the $12 billion that's owed to the European Union in July. And the Greeks are going to opt out, and it's going to blow a huge hole through the euro. And
it's not just going to blow a hole.
Want to bail everybody out, which the Germans don't want to. There's a big debate in Germany right now. In fact, former Chancellor Schmidt and former Chancellor Schroeder denounced Merkel yesterday for not inviting Putin to the G8 and continuing this idea of the G7. And what Schroeder said is, look, Russia is a natural trade partner with Germany. And if we lose this, we're going to end up in a confrontation that's completely avoidable.
Well, they've already lost bilateral trade on a number of technological and other issues, including foodstuffs,
which are very important for Germany. Yeah,
and when those patterns of trade change permanently to other nations like South America, Germany is royally screwed. And the problem is that the Germans starting to understand this. They're smart enough to realize what they're doing is damaging themselves permanently. This is not just a temporary damage. This is a permanent one that'll take many decades.
Did you hear the other scandal here? While Germany's trade with Russia is collapsing, guess whose trade with Russia is going up? The United States.
Probably. Oh, really?
Yeah, and they're doing it through fake companies from other countries.
Well, you know, most people don't realize this, and I was told this by an NSA senior agent back in the mid-'90s. 90% plus of the budget for the No Such Agency and the NSA, which is 300 times the budget of the CIA, which is larger than all other intelligence agencies on the planet, 90% is industrial espionage.
Yep.
Industrial espionage. Believe it or not.
And that's
people say, no.
Snowden exposed.
Yeah, 90%. So in other words, they're just using it as a tool for transnational U.S.-based corporations to put the screws to everybody and every corporation other than American-based on Earth. That's what the NSA is all about.
Yep. I'll see you next week, Bill.
Amazing show. Good progress. Keep praying, people. Keep on supporting people in both parties, including O'Malley and Rand and Wyden, to move forward on these issues, or we are screwed. Back in a moment with hour number 2. Stay there tuned. Great shows today for you.